Energy Transition, episode number 84. Our topic today is coal is back. In fact, it was never gone, David. Hello, everyone. Please
Hello.
let me share. Please let me share some data that may be interesting to contextualize first. The United States, Russia, Australia, and China together hold more than 60% of the world's coal reserves. It's a very strong position for them. Another one is here. South Africa, China, and India are more than 50% dependent on coal in their energy matrix. The third one. China is the world leader in the number of coal plants, with more than 1,000 of them, more than the next 10 countries combined.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's impressive. And finally, the last one is, and the West demands its citizens to reduce their carbon footprint. Well, as David said, in fact, it was never gone. David, please.
Yeah, well, that's true. It never was gone, despite all the propaganda we see in our media about this energy transition. Coal usage has been, I guess, reduced somewhat in the United States and probably in Europe as a whole. Although we see Germany, of course, reactivating its mothballed coal plants in preparation for winter again, which, is very telling about how much they want to really rely on all the wind and solar they built over the last 20 years as part of their Energy Venda project. And the coal demand globally is rising. We used record amount of coal last year. In 2022, we will set a new record again this year. It's mainly driven by China and India, as those charts starkly point out. China, in addition to the more than 1,100 plants they currently have active, have 243 more as of last week, probably more than that now, already permitted and under construction to add to that mix. And they continue to issue new permits for 1 to 2 additional plants each week. Okay.
Yeah.
And India is also dramatically expanding its use of coal. Its national energy company announced last week that it had increased its production of coal by 83% in the first 6 months of its fiscal year, which began on April 1st, as compared to the previous year. So India is also rapidly expanding its coal uses. These are the 2 most populated countries on Earth, with a combined population at last count of roughly 2.8 billion human beings living in those 2 countries. And their economies are rapidly expanding, and their governments know that to maintain grid stability and energy security, they need more coal. And so, this is a global environment that we live in, a global atmosphere, and it just renders all these efforts in the West to reduce carbon emissions as little more than highly propagandized futile gestures, as long as India and China are moving in this direction. And there's not much we can do about it, frankly. So that's the truth, and I'm sticking to it.
And Irina, Germany is reactivating 4 coal plants, I suppose, for winter coming. So what's the reasonable?
From what I read, they're opening these coal power plants to save gas, which sounds like a joke, I admit, but nobody could have come up with this joke because they don't need to. Germany is the joke right now. It's doing this because it's closed its nuclear plants. It could have had low carbon energy by keeping these nuclear plants operating, but it had decided to shut them down, and it did shut them down. And now it is resorting to reopening coal power plants. And I have really no idea how the government is explaining this to the people whom they are asking to continue reducing their energy consumption so the country can get through winter, even with, gas in storage at a record high. I mean, European gas storage is near 100% full, and yet Germany is reopening coal power plants, which are not low carbon, not at all. But in order to save gas, they're reopening coal power plants.
Yeah, tell me, what's the logic for German governors? I cannot understand.
Logic. I don't know. The logic is out the window, and I think it also refers to what the people think, because there were two fairly big elections in Germany yesterday, and the SDP was soundly defeated in both of them. The Alternative for Deutschland party received second place, which like a 5% increase in both of those regions, which, the Greens and the SPD are below them now. And now they're freaking out that maybe we need to ban this party for democracy.
Of course. Yeah, that would
of
be
course, right? But I mean, so there's no real logic behind it, except for the fact that wind and solar can't supply the energy that's required, especially in wintertime, especially when demand will increase. And therefore, Germany has coal, just like most countries around the world have some amount of coal, which is why it's ubiquitous to some extent compared to oil and natural gas, which are in specific areas. And so this is something they have control over. They have these coal-fired plants that are basically operating as, baseload supply, which you need. And what I find so awful is that Canada, for example, is always talking about how we need to emulate Germany. We need to emulate Europe. And it's really important to, set the standard and all this kind of thing. And they're going after the province of Saskatchewan, which has 3 coal-fired plants. The plants are right beside the coal mines, kind of like in Germany. And our activist, former Greenpeace campaigner, environment minister is saying you have to shut them or else, or it'll be a criminal offense if you keep them open. And it's like there's 3 versus the 1,100 and something of China, plus the additional 200 and something they're opening. And it's like, yeah, it doesn't matter, Saskatchewan, you have to close your coal plants. And if that means your people freeze in the dark, oh, well, it's a price to pay for saving the world, for saving, climate change or whatever.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Can I add, before we go to the next topic, I want to add
of
what
course.
Tammy and Irina said about Germany, because we picked on Germany a lot. Because
They deserve
Germany,
it.
They were the
Germany's
first
government
ones.
deserves it. Yeah.
They deserve it.
But
They
to be
started
fair to
it.
Germany's government, which I don't really care much to be fair to Germany's government, because they don't deserve it, right? But to be fair, we're doing the same thing in Texas, okay?
Yeah.
In terms of reactivating mothballed coal plants and natural gas plants. ERCOT sent out a notice last week to prepare for winter, we need to reactivate these mothballed coal plants and mothballed natural gas plants, peaker plants that we have across Texas, because they know, despite this massive build out in solar we've had over the last 3 years and this huge fleet of wind power, they know in winter, solar and wind can't be relied on to sustain reliability. And ERCOT is the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. And its main job is to ensure reliability. So with winter approaching, what's it doing? It's reactivating coal and natural gas power plants. Okay. This is our reality. And they're doing it because they understand the laws of physics and thermodynamics. Okay. That's what this all boils down to. So anyway, that's my commercial today for ERCOT.
That's great. Only to say bonjour. The same
Good
guy
morning.
gave us good morning.
Bonjour.
Good morning.
And another,
morning.
Ibrahim. Good morning too. But Irina, why this number of operational coal power in China is so big. What's the mindset for them to have compared to other countries?
Well, I've said it before, and I got criticized about it. I don't know why. China is being pragmatic. I mean, this is not a moral category. You can like or dislike China, or hate it or whatever, but they are being pragmatic. They have 1.5 billion people to keep warm and, comfortable as much as possible, which is why China, which is the biggest builder of wind and solar, is also the biggest builder of coal. One government official said it 2 years ago, I think, some deputy minister or something. He said, we want energy security, which is why we will continue building wind and solar, but we will also continue building new coal power capacity, because wind and solar can't cut it. It's as simple as that. I think it's the same with India. It's the same with Pakistan, which had its own problems with natural gas, with LNG, when LNG got too expensive. So Pakistan reverted to coal. And it's not just Pakistan, it's all the other poorer nations in Asia, because coal is cheap and it gives you reliable energy. This was why the Bulgarian workers at the coal mines that supply our biggest, power plants are still protesting. They're still blocking the highway, even after all the others cut a deal with the government. But the miners are still protesting because, first of all, they don't want to lose their jobs. And they know that, coal supplies more than 50% of our energy. You can't replace that with wind and solar.
Not easy.
Not in 10 years, not in 20, not ever.
Yeah.
And tell me, the West countries is paying the account to let's see, the footprint account, and China is not taking care of this issue.
Well, I mean, China's made commitments for 2060, maybe to be net zero. Who knows? That's a long ways away. And, maybe by 2030, they'll stop peaking their production. So, another 7 years of building out and then slowing down after that to 2060. So who knows what'll happen between now and then, between now and 2030 when they're building up. But if I could just go back to the issue of coal reserves, and that it is a stable resource and you can stockpile it more easily than, say, holding oil or having storage for natural gas. And China has the 4th largest coal reserves in the world. So why wouldn't they try to build up and store what they've got? And, I think the hypocrisy of it is that in Canada, you're not allowed to use the coal for electricity after 2030. But they still mine it in British Columbia and export it, which is that really funny ship named Climate Justice that was taking coal from British Columbia to export it to Asia, ostensibly for steel production. And so, okay, coal you can use for steel, but not for power. And even if you have clean coal technology, which scrubs a lot of the particulate matter, which makes it actually very... the emissions are quite significantly reduced if you deploy the new technology. Why shouldn't you be able to use it? And it's reliable and provides baseload and everything. So with Western countries, it's always such a I don't have words to describe what it is, because it's just so foolhardy. And I think what David said in the beginning, that it's futile, is absolutely correct. We're making all these cuts, destroying our economies for what? For what? If greenhouse gases are a global issue and it all is mixed into the atmosphere, then what the heck are we doing over here where we hardly produce any of it? So.
Yeah, people like to say money is a fungible commodity, right? Money is fungible, oil is fungible, the atmosphere is fungible. Okay, we all share one atmosphere, and those emissions go into the atmosphere, and the wind currents carry them all over the world. And regardless of where the emissions are coming from, they count the same. And so it doesn't matter what we're doing in the United States. In terms of emissions reduction, if China's increasing its emissions by 20 times what we're reducing. It just
Yeah.
is futile.
Insane. Yeah, that's right. Good morning, Arham.
Good morning.
And there is a question from SRB. Probably for you,
Yeah.
David.
Are all 4 of the reactivated coal plants in Germany fired with lignite? I don't know the answer to that. I
I
know
don't-
at least
Maybe
a
that's
couple
what they
are.
have.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know the type of coal they have.
Well, they dismantled that wind farm near a
For a
lignite
lignite
coal mine.
Yeah.
But there is no alternative for coal. I mean,
No.
what? No.
Well,
Not in the near
apparently
term.
there isn't. No,
Yeah.
as Tammy said, it's ubiquitous. Every country has some.
Yeah.
It's
And it's cheap.
always good to rely, and it's cheap. It's always good to rely on your own supply rather than import. I mean, look at India. India has to import more than 85% of the oil it uses, but it's got quite a lot of coal. Of course, it's not going to give this up.
Yeah.
Right.
Actually, if I can comment, yes, the coal plants that they're reopening are lignite, at least
Okay.
according to Bloomberg.
Okay.
Oh, good. Great.
So,
Great.
Well, so, and I wonder what the rest of you think about this. Doesn't this really get back to the point? Coal plants do create emissions, right, and other pollution, and
No doubt.
we've shown that with the installation of technology, you can dramatically reduce those emissions.
yeah.
And carbon capture technology has the potential for capturing the carbon emissions and storing them permanently underground. We know this works. We know you can do it. Why are we dismantling our entire energy system in our global $120 trillion economy, rather than with all these subsidies for these intermittent forms of energy that can't viably replace coal and natural gas and power generation? Why aren't we spending at least a portion of that money cleaning up the system we already have that we know works quite well? Okay,
Yeah.
I mean, if you were, we're in the United States, we are debt funding $369 billion in subsidies through the IRA for green energy. What if we took half of that and subsidized the coal industry to completely remove these emissions and capture them and store them, rather than dismantling this incredibly reliable and cheap source of base load power? The whole transition, the whole mindset, to me is a form of mental illness and a
It
lack
is.
of the ability to think logically. And I just wonder what the rest of you think about that.
Well, you said it is because it makes sense. They're going in the opposite direction. They're going into a direction that does not make sense. They're going into EVs and wind and solar and all this and green hydrogen. They're still talking about green
Yes.
hydrogen, which does not make sense at all.
Yeah.
And it's not all this propaganda against hydrocarbons from coal to gas would just be wasted if they suddenly wake up and
Right.
realize here's something that makes sense and we could do it.
Yeah, we
Well,
could, but it's economically difficult, right? So the subsidies would
Yeah,
help.
well, the transition as is economically difficult
Right. Right.
and
Which,
very, very expensive, but it doesn't matter. It's like they're deliberately moving away from anything that might make economic sense
Yeah.
and logical sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As you
It's
say.
yeah.
Yeah, and China continues permitting 1 or 2 new coal every week.
Every week.
Week.
Yeah. And then, so if I can just chime into what David was asking and what Irina said, it's that I think the problem is when you have so many government subsidies and there's these vested interests in farming those subsidies, it's distorting not just the market, but the ability to innovate. So companies that may have been exploring better alternatives for clean coal technology find better ways to improve the system, as David had pointed out. They will no longer make those investments because they can get subsidies for doing other stuff. And so instead of exploring what makes most sense for efficiency or actual environmental care, that money is going elsewhere to wherever the projects are that governments are favoring at the moment. And governments of all creatures, I'll use that word, they can never choose the right one because
Right.
it's usually based on outdated information. It's whatever is the trendy thing at the moment. And so it always ends up distorting the market and making things worse. So I find it very unfortunate that companies fall into that trap of farming those subsidies. But I guess the problem is if your competitor's doing it and you're not, then you fall behind, and everyone kind of gets pulled into that wake of doing, going into the subsidy game rather than doing what's best for the business or for innovation.
And this all plays into a wonderful piece Arena published this morning on her Substack about the first rule of holes. And I want to give Arena a minute to comment.
I didn't even know it was the first rule of holes. I thought it was a standalone rule.
That's great.
No, but what Tammy said reminds me of something else. Let's not forget that there is a whole industry of NGOs and forecasters that depend on propagandizing against hydrocarbons, including coal.
Yeah.
I mean, they live off that.
They live for it. Yeah.
And they would shrivel and die if governments start doing the thing that makes sense. And these NGOs are advising governments.
Yeah.
You've probably seen how even companies like Restart Energy or Wood Mackenzie have changed over the years. They used to be quite objective and unbiased. Now they are also advocating for the transition and churning out forecasts that tell us the transition will work. Well, a lot of companies, a lot of pension funds base their investment decisions on these forecasts. You expect them to be reliable, but they are no longer reliable. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
These are no longer reliable forecasts.
Yeah, David published today morning about the similarity of between energy.
OPEC and Restart.
No. Hystad and International Energy Agency. Is it?
Yeah, Rystad. Yeah, they had the. I think it was Arena who wrote about that study, right, last week.
For oil price,
projection of peak oil by 2027
or something,
which is just stunning to me because I've always had such a high degree of respect for Rystad that and then OPEC comes out today, with their own projection that we're gonna have 116 million barrels a day demand in 2045. Well, who's going to be right? My money's OPEC is going to be right because they've always been pretty astute at projecting the market. They have a vested interest in being able to project the market, right? Whereas, like Arena says, you have these companies that are now pressuring groups like Rystad and Wood Mackenzie and these other expert groups to give them studies that reinforce their desire, their own desire to make these green energy investments. And it's a self-biasing dynamic within corporate world now because the leadership in these corporations wants to be able to virtue signal about their own green investments. And so it just
the media amplify organizations like Ember, which is as far from unbiased as I can imagine. And they serve it to us as if it's news rather than propaganda, which it is. So,
we have a question or a comment from...
the cost of green subsidies in the IRA could be 10 times the original CBO score. Yes.
What's CBO?
That's from the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian think tank. But I mean, there's the rationale for that, of course, is the tax incentives are going to be a lot more costly because you're funding all this green energy investment that's going to take advantage of those incentives. And it's the CBO score that was put on that bill. Congressional Budget Office their scores are always ridiculously low when it comes to these kinds of things. And it's because of the method they're forced to use. So anyway, I could go on about that and I really don't want to.
Tell me, do you imagine how happy is Greta at this time?
I don't
She's
know.
never
Is she
home.
gonna go? Is she gonna go chain herself to the German coal plant? I don't know. Maybe glue herself to the road on the way. Maybe. I don't. This is the thing: is that Germany's doing it because they need to keep the lights on. Otherwise, there will be. I think people will be very angry and get out in the streets. The Germans do have a very strong green. I would say 20% of the population support broad environmental objectives and whatnot, and we're willing to go along with the energy transition as long as it wasn't too expensive and wouldn't jeopardize the economy and all these other things. And that's been the promise of net zero. You can just swap one form of energy for another. You can just swap one type of vehicle for another. Your way of life isn't going to change very much. But the reality is starting to sink in that isn't the case, that you cannot run an entire technological modern civilization on wind and solar. Even with batteries, not enough. It doesn't work. You need the base load. So where are you going to get the base load from? And so Germany's trying to make the LNG fill in where natural gas from Russia used to operate, and now they're finding they don't quite have enough, or maybe there's not enough LNG terminals just yet, and so they have to rely on the coal to keep the lights on. So there's this. The Greens will support stuff as long as it's not too much of a sacrifice and things can still keep going on as normal. And the UK has made a few little changes, which isn't much. But Canada's still doubling down. America's still doubling down. So we'll see how that plays out in the next 6 months over winter.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, do we have an energy transition or not, Irina?
No, we don't. We think we do. Well, not us, but some people think we are having an energy transition and it's working out well, but we actually don't. It's like one step forward, 5 steps backward. This is what's happening in reality, and it can't be any other way.
So, David, the conclusion is that coal will live with us for a long time.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, certainly for the duration of all of our lifetimes. And we don't have an energy transition. We have an energy addition of all forms of energy.
Well,
and the innovation piece of it is really good for the future, way out in the distance.
Right. But that innovation can't happen if things are being distorted by government. Because if the government's choosing what that innovation should be, then there's not going to be the innovation that we need. And so that's.
Yeah, Tammy, to conclude, can you go to Germany and help them to make something better?
No.
better her than me, that's for sure.
Yeah.
They don't deserve it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure to meet
Thank
you
you.
today.
Everybody have a great week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.